Well, joining me now to take a look at what kind of a week it's been in federal politics with confidence votes in a near election and the growing impact of the coronavirus's second wave. I'm joined by three journalists. Mia Rabson is a national political reporter for the Canadian Press. Kristy Kirkup is a reporter for the Globe and Mail. And Niiggan Sinclair is a professor and a columnist for the Winnipeg Free Press. All three of you, thanks for joining me.
Hello.
Let's start with it. I'm going to open the microphone to the three of you. It has been quite a week where we saw a confidence vote and people were getting ready for the possibility of the government falling and a snap election. Reflections on what we saw this week. I'll start with you, Mia.
Yeah, well, politics is back on Parliament Hill, surprisingly. I mean, when you have politicians, they like to do politics, and we saw that in full display this week. I think there was some relief among some that there wasn't an election. I think others maybe wanted to go to an election and maybe put this brinkmanship behind us, because I don't think this is the last we're going to see of it. And by the time the vote happened on Wednesday, it was pretty clear what was going to be the result. But there was definitely more tension around this vote than there was around the throne speech and how that would go. And it definitely, that camaraderie that might have existed back in April when the pandemic was first starting has definitely dissipated at this point.
Kristy, does it, as Mia suggests, is this the natural result, be it a few weeks later, of a full House of Commons being back with all the full powers of a House of Commons in a minority parliament?
Yeah, I think that, this is reflective of the fact that, of course, minority parliaments, all the political parties are always in election readiness mode. They have to be, because they never know when that moment is going to happen and Canadians will have to go back to the polls. I have to say, though, and I know this is a bit of a straw poll analysis, but, talking to people in my neighborhood, talking to people I know, they're worried about one thing, and that's the pandemic, when their life is going to go back to normal, when there's going to be a vaccine available. And, we're going into what is going to be, not to be incredibly depressing, but it's going to be a tough winter. And we see the cases indicating as much. And so this was a moment where I think all the political parties, as they were kind of looking ahead at that prospect of an election, I don't think that Canadians really wanted to think about an election because, frankly, they've had enough this year. So, I think everyone was able to breathe a collective sigh of relief that this wasn't the moment. But I think, everyone, again, is getting game ready because maybe it will be, that hopefully not this winter, maybe into the spring, but it's around the corner for sure.
Niiggan, I know the last time we spoke with you, you were really eloquent in painting the portrait of getting out of the Ottawa bubble, sitting there in Manitoba and in Winnipeg. I mean, you have the highest per capita rates of COVID in the country. How is this playing out there? I mean, when people watch the kind of what happened on Wednesday, the vote that could have brought the government down, your reflections on it?
Well, I mean, this week, I think what you really saw is you saw the first week of Erin O'Toole as the Conservative leader and kind of the approach he's going to take. And the approach that he took this week is really very much overplaying his hand and pushing the government to a position in which they really had to do a confidence vote. And you also saw NDP leader Jagmeet Singh as going with the government, kind of, even though they had asked for changes, not getting them done. And so it's kind of, I think, a loss for Jagmeet Singh and for Erin O'Toole this week. However, I don't think people are paying a lot of attention to the drama in Ottawa because of the pandemic, but also this incredible cacophony of issues involving Indigenous peoples across the country. Yeah. Only about a couple hours ago, we heard about the boil water advisories in Neskantaga and the emergency situation. People are finding oil or slicks or contamination in the water there, an emergency situation. And then not only do we have an issue with treaty rights in Nova Scotia, but now we have an issue of boil water advisories, which, of course, the Trudeau government has promised to fix, has now said they won't fix, probably in this minority parliament. And now we've got this ongoing issue that's continuing around racism in the country and Indigenous peoples continuing over and over again to experience the brunt of that systemic racism in institutions across the country. So we've got a real, a week in which kind of it's the same old, but it's political drama that I don't think people are paying as much attention to because of the concerns within their own lives.
Mm-hmm. I'll ask a speculative question, Mia, maybe with you. One of the things that came out of the vote on Wednesday was that 6 Conservative MPs didn't turn up for that vote, which meant that the Conservatives themselves, probably, in case the NDP abstained, this is, I know, inside the Beltway, but it almost looks as if the Conservatives were making it such that they were not going to cause the government to fall as well. It looks as if everyone, in their own way, was avoiding an election.
Maybe, although there are some who have pointed out a few times that perhaps the party, and the only party that really wanted an election right now, was the one who really triggered this, which was the Liberals.
Yeah.
You know, they were the ones who turned this into a confidence motion based on their own filibustering that left the Conservatives sort of saying, well, if you're not going to let us do it in this committee, we'll try and create another committee and sort of show you that you are in a minority parliament. So the Liberals didn't seem to be afraid of an election. Obviously, they voted against it, but they really did not seem to be afraid to go to the polls. Most of the other parties really didn't seem to want to.
Okay, and Kristy, I know you filed today because Niiggan refers to what's going on in terms of other issues. You filed on one of those other issues, and that is the Assembly First Nations, Perry Bellegarde, the chief, the national chief, asking for the RCMP commissioner's resignation because of the handling of the Nova Scotia lobster and Indigenous lobster fishery issue. So you've got that as well.
Yeah, for sure. And, the AFN national chief is really joining a chorus of Indigenous leaders who have been calling for the commissioner to resign. Specifically, she had a news conference this week where she was asked specifically about how RCMP officers on the ground in Nova Scotia responded to violence and intimidation towards Mi'kmaq. And she did not address the criticism at all, not a word. I specifically asked her about that. And so that is why there have been these renewed calls for her resignation. You'll recall that back in the spring, she also was facing calls to resign over issues she had around the application of the term systemic racism in the RCMP. At that time, the Prime Minister stood beside her and said that, he would work with her and the RCMP on reforms. And she also put out a subsequent statement on the existence of systemic racism in the force. Now, also the Indigenous Services Minister did an interview with the Globe where he said he was in disagreement with the RCMP commissioner's assessment of the situation on the ground. And there have been comments, again, that her comments defending the officers really flies in the face of concrete evidence. So this is a story to watch for. What will the Prime Minister do? Will he remove the RCMP commissioner? Because those calls, again, are growing louder and louder for her to be taken out. She's been in place since March 2018. Will the Prime Minister stand by her this time?
Okay, last a few seconds. We only have about 10, 20 seconds left. Niiggan, what are you going to be watching for over the next week? Obviously not another confidence vote.
Yeah, it's important to identify that there's a cacophony of people calling for the RCMP commissioner's removal, but there's also disagreement in the Liberal cabinet. I mean, Bill Blair's come out fairly in support of the RCMP commissioner, even though Mark Miller, the Indigenous Services Minister, is criticizing. So it's a really interesting thing to watch, I think, in the Liberal cabinet of some uncertainty of how to deal with this issue involving treaty rights, which frankly Conservative and Liberal governments have failed the Mi'kmaq in this regard all the way back to the 1999 Marshall decision.
Okay, all three of you, I want to thank you. It's always a pleasure to get your points of view on this. Thanks very much and have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.